Bom dia a todos, obrigado por terem vindo tão cedo este segundo dia do Fórum Fantástico para a primeira palestra neste conjunto da mecânica da literatura, da escrita da literatura fantástica. Nós pensámos como sendo uma oportunidade de aproveitar os autores e alguns convidados especiais para algumas temáticas particulares, para vos dar também um pouco da ideia da parte mais profissional, da parte mais técnica. Portanto, vamos começar com o Ricardo Pinto, como nós falávamos há bocado. É um autor português, é um autor internacional, portanto, também tem vários pontos de vista, provavelmente particulares, para partilhar connosco. Que irá falar de Worldbuilding, ou seja, de construção de mundos. Imagino que será depois uma palestra interativa com as vossas perguntas e com o conhecimento do Ricardo. E então, nesse caso, vamos começar.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Eu consigo falar português, mas não lá muito bem. Por isso, como nós vamos discutir uma coisa aqui um pouco técnica, é melhor eu falar inglês. Isso não é um problema? No? Good. Okay. All fiction seems to me to involve world building. I'm going to this is my own personal opinion, okay, about how I do it. It's not, I'm not saying that this is the way it has to be done. And so all fiction involves world building. And it seems to me that in science fiction and fantasy, world building is even more important than it is in other kinds of fiction. And in fact, I think to a great extent, in a lot of science fiction, and perhaps even more so in fantasy, the world that you build actually carries most of the story. So often, the characters don't have to be very involving as much as they have to be in other literature, which I think is probably one of the reasons that science fiction and fantasy is not well considered by the literati. Why is it important to build a world well? Obviously, you have to carry the story, but one of the things I think is absolutely critical in fantasy and science fiction is that you have total immersion. While you're inside whatever invented world you're in, you want to feel that you're completely underneath the surface. And if you come across something in the way that this world is built that wakes you up out of that dream, that kind of makes you come above the water, then you lose the image and it's gone. And so it seems to me that it's very important to actually produce a world that the details of which are consistent enough that people don't wake up from the dream that you're putting in front of them through the book. Another reason why I think world building needs to be very well constructed is that it's for coherence. One of the things that I remember reading a book a long time ago in which there was a cathedral with bishops and priests, but they didn't worship Christ. They worshipped the great orb, and that just struck me as being incredibly lazy and also quite ridiculous, because if you basically, the reason a church, a cathedral, has a certain shape, I mean, it's often in cruciform, is because, the Christ died on a cross. If you're worshipping a sphere, then it's not going to be a cathedral. It's probably going to be a big round building of some kind. So it's very important to try and make sure that the world that you design actually fits the story that you're telling, the cultures that you're describing. Another thing that is very important is security. When I was writing my trilogy, for example, it spanned 12 years. I was writing this thing. And I knew that the first part was going to be published. I then was going to take years because I was taking forever to write the thing because it was very complicated. And I knew that the second book was going to come out after the first book was published. Now, by the time, I didn't know it was going to take me 10 years, but the point is that once the book is out there, you've said the things that you've said. Now, if you haven't designed your world tightly enough, there is a danger that you'll have your first published book, you'll put all kinds of stuff in there, you come and produce the second book, and then you suddenly go, oh no, this contradicts the stuff that's in the first book. So then you have to start making changes and modifications to try, and before you know it, by the time you get to the end, the whole thing has just come apart, it's come to pieces. So, to avoid that problem, I put an enormous amount of effort into actually imagining some of the things that would happen in my third book and working out what the consequences of those would be for the stuff I was describing in the first book, and making the world as coherent and as complete as possible so that I would have confidence that later on, when I got to something unexpected, that it would still all work. Now, okay, what's the basic thing that's involved in building a world for a book? I think the two critical things that are involved are space and time. The space, as you can see in, for example, in a lot of fantasy books, but this is particularly true for fantasy books, since Tolkien, they come with a map at the front. And the reason you need this map is because all these things are happening across this landscape, and you need to be able to know where you are. Now, so obviously, one of the first things you have to do is actually create the space in which your story happens. And this then allows you which often happens, it's the nature of a lot of fantasy books, that people travel a lot. And it's important that you know where they're actually going. And the other thing, of course, is that it basically provides the stage upon which you put your drama. Time is really the critical factor there is history. That your story is going to be set. It's not just suddenly, people suddenly appear, these things happen, and they all disappear. The point is that your story is going to occur in a historical process. So to some extent, it's very important that you know where the world that you are describing today, where it came from. And that means that you have to have some idea of the history that occurred before your story starts happening. I think if you look at the way we live our lives, if you walk around Lisboa, you'll see there are buildings from, 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, modern buildings, and all of these things together, they form a kind of mosaic in which the quality of Lisboa is that it has this past, and you can see it in the buildings, and you can see it in the way that people move around the city, so that there will be certain patterns of roads, squares, whatever, which have been there for such long, since the Middle Ages perhaps, and that is what gives Lisboa its character. So similarly, you need to be able to actually, when you're designing the world, you need to actually have a notion of how the things that you're describing came there. Why are they here? Where do they come from? And this kind of thing is a very good discipline because it basically means that you don't end up with all kinds of ludicrous things. I remember I used to play Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger, and one of the things that was completely absurd about it was you would be in a dungeon which was composed of 100 rooms, and you'd open one room and there was a dragon in it,